Hello, and welcome to our Ask the Experts live chat, brought to you by McCain Foodservice, where you'll have the chance to pose questions about the challenges and opportunities of delivery, takeout, and catering to us. I'm Peter Romeo, editor-at-large of Restaurant Business and its website, restaurantbusinessonline.com, and I'll be guiding our discussion today. With me is Rich Shank, Director of Consumer Research for Technomic, the research sister of Restaurant Business, who'll be sharing some data and insights with us. If you'd like further details about either of us, you'll find links to our detailed bios in the comments. Welcome, Rich.
Thanks for having me.
Before we get started, let's review some housekeeping details. To ask questions of us, please enter your questions in the comments section in the live stream. Those will be collected and passed along to us by our off-premise colleague, Kaylee Bogdan. We'll also have instructions at the end of the chat about how to access what was covered here. So let's get started, Rich. So off-premise sales have always been a big part of the restaurant industry, vis-a-vis McDonald's and drive-thrus, but never on the order of what we're seeing today. I mean, we are seeing off-premise just boom. Readers in our next issue will learn that 44% of industry sales are generated by off-premise. That's delivery, takeout, and catering. And a big portion of that is just delivery. So it's arguable that delivery, takeout, and catering have been the big trends of the last 2 years, that's been the mega game changer. How likely is off-premise to retain that title going through the rest of this year in 2019?
So I would say it's very likely. It's going to be part of the core business of many restaurants, especially quick service. It already is. Mm-hmm. And a lot of that is because we're seeing the restaurant industry actually catch up with where consumers have been in other markets for a long time because of basically the technological innovation in third-party delivery, ordering applications, and things of that nature that are facilitating more off-premise orders. Mm-hmm. And if you think about the role that restaurants play in the lives of everyday people, which in many cases on an everyday basis is as a time saver for when you're moving to and from work, when you're trying to find time in between different roles in your lives, because now there are these new technologies out there that allow you to make quicker decisions, you're seeing this very quick adoption cycle happen on the consumer side and on the operator side because it just fits within the everyday lifestyle of the consumer.
Mm-hmm. So it's not pushed down from the operator, it's pulled along by the consumer. Could you quantify for us what type of growth are we talking about with off-premise or any of the three main sectors?
So we're looking year over year about a 10% growth in delivery, in just delivery alone, and that would include both self-delivery from restaurants, but also the third party. And now when you parcel out what third party delivery is doing, we're expecting about a 33% growth in third party delivery. So that is what's really driving some of the changes that are going on today.
Mm-hmm. And give us a number to compare that to the overall industry sales growth that's expected.
You're depending on the market, it's anywhere between flat and about 3%.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So that's some significant growth. Where's it coming from? Is it a matter of the off-premise occasion shifting to the home or the office? What's the source of this business?
Yeah, so I think we should keep in mind that many of our operator clients are in the early sort of adoption cycle of all of these products. So when they talk, or all of these online delivery services, and so when they talk to us, they're telling us they're seeing a lot of incremental visits, but that's not necessarily the whole story because it's a mix of both incremental visits that are coming from either retail potential like at-home meals, so it's a form of meal home meal replacement, for example, but it's also bringing in customers from other competitive restaurants because now when you're ordering on a third-party platform, for example, you're sort of leveling the playing field between all the brands that are sitting there. So if I want to order tacos, I can look at every taco shop that delivers to me, and that puts each brand on the same plane. Whereas before, you're relying on brand equity, brand awareness, and so on and so forth. And so you're getting a lot of cross shopper behavior between restaurants, and then you're also seeing consumers change their behavior. They're moving from in-store purchases to delivery. Mm-hmm. Right, and so you're starting to see the sales mix of many restaurants shift from dine-in to both takeout and delivery, so that off-premise is starting to capture more and more share of sales for many of our operator customers.
Overall, though, even with that little bit of a shift, is it incremental, largely incremental?
Right now, it's incremental. Over time, that incrementality is going to start to decrease because you're starting to become the new normal. So, and some of our brands may already be in that new normal.
So both the facilitator, the blessing, and the curse are third-party delivery systems.
Yep.
How important are they in this this boom?
They're very important. I mean, they're what's growing the quickest, right? And there's a very good reason why that is, because they facilitate consumer choices. They make them easier. Consumers today can find a brand that they never heard of before on these platforms, and they can experiment with them, and so they can actually expand their horizons that way. And consumers are adopting those platforms for that reason, right? And so on the operator side, what that allows many of our operator clients to do is it gives them the ability to cast a wider net with their customer base. So many of these third-party platforms become sort of the tip of the mouth of the wide sort of marketing funnel, and it allows them to increase their brand awareness, to do some local marketing without having to spend a lot of money, with the exception of the fees that they pay for delivery.
Well, you talk about brand awareness, but have you seen anything that indicates whether, if I'm a consumer and I'm ordering delivery through Uber, whether I regard myself as an Uber customer or the restaurant whose delivery food I'm eating?
I think consumers have in their mind a bit of a mixed signal. They know that they're buying, let's just say from Uber Eats, they know they're buying McDonald's, but when it comes to who they would hold accountable for a problem, they aren't necessarily sure who that person is, and so they kind of view themselves as a customer of both, right? And so on the operator side, consumers still have a tendency to blame the operator for problems that occur during delivery, and so I would say for the most part they still view themselves as a McDonald's customer in that instance. However, that particular customer may be more loyal to Uber Eats for a variety of reasons versus one of the other third-party apps, like a Grubhub or something, depending on the nature of the restaurants that they tend to visit. So the portfolio of restaurants, each of those brands sort of dictate which ones they're going to use.
Sure. So you mentioned some disappointments that could come up with off-premise, specifically delivery. What are some of the considerations for the operator in entrusting their food and their experience to a third party? What do you hear from operators about what most concerns them? It's a pretty widespread list of concerns, and so they range from front of house, back of house issues. And so, one of the top pain points has to do with point of sale integration, because that's sort of the linchpin of where all the throughput's going to happen for many of our restaurants. And so if they're not able to integrate, they might have 3 or 4 different ordering platforms coming in to their stores, and if they're not able to integrate that seamlessly into their point of sale platform, then orders may be missed, things might be off, things of that nature. That's a big sort of pain point for many of our operator customers. Now on the front of house side, there's concerns about holding times for food, because they have no control over the staffing levels of these third-party delivery services, and so there's some challenges there related to delivery time and so on. One of the things that's interesting about third-party delivery, if you think about pizza delivery in the 80s or 90s, when there were brands out there making promises about short delivery times, the promised delivery time now and the expectation of consumers has been extended, because third-party delivery tend to not promise anything within the hour, right? So consumers are sort of become acclimated to that willingness to wait. But in between that time period, operators are struggling with holding times and throughput issues that really have a hard time keeping up in some cases if their brand becomes very popular on one of these platforms. That term that we use editorially, by the way, for the tablet mania is tablet hell, where you could have, if you're lucky, only 3 or 4, but you could have 6 or 7. and you're not sure what's coming in. And then the other issue is a lot of times you have to input that into your system because it doesn't automatically flow in.
Yeah.
So it's another bottleneck.
So we've got a question for you guys. It's about for operators that have never put together a delivery program. Can you touch on the best ways to start or the best tips for getting started with that?
Sure.
That's an interesting question. I'd love to get your take on it.
Sure.
Because this is something we hear a lot from operators who take the plunge or refuse to take the plunge.
So I would say if you're thinking of self-delivery versus third-party, self-delivery is, if you haven't ever done it before, is a long-term investment problem for any brand or a strategy that you would want to look at. But the quickest way to get started, obviously, is through third-party, right? Because they have the infrastructure built. You would want to understand, a number of different things if you're going to do that. Are your customers on those platforms? Which platforms are growing the fastest in your area? Because even though platforms like Uber Eats and Grubhub have expanded dramatically over the course of the last few years, their geographic footprint, there's still regional fragmentation in terms of which of these platforms is strongest in particular areas of the country. And so understanding what's the leading service provider there, what are they going to charge you out of the gate, and is your kitchen set up to handle extra orders during peak times? Because you're going to have to think about what's going on from staffing to throughput at peak times, because there was a period where there were some restaurant brands or even independents turning off their third-party delivery system during peak times. But that's where you're going to lose incrementality, because that's when most of the ordering is happening anyway. So you need to plan for those peak times, staff up, and understand how you're going to organize your kitchen to handle that extra load.
So operators tell us all the time that they got into it because they could no longer afford to stay on the sidelines. They had to get in there because the business was going to someone. So the easiest way to get in there was to go with a third party. You come in, basically, it's very simple, relatively simple. Yes, you have that tablet, but for the most part, they do a lot of the heavy lifting. But what they've discovered is that not all of those third parties are equal, and even by geography, there's a great range in the quality of service you're going to get, or your customer is going to get, from those third parties. So they always regret that they didn't do more due diligence up front and asking other operators, what are your experiences? Even down to the point of what drivers do you avoid, that type of thing, and try to pinpoint it. But I think that that's probably the easiest way to jump into it. And then it comes down to learning from there and forever chasing that ultimate goal of having enough volume to do it by yourself. Now, we're talking about third-party delivery services and how expensive they are. We might want to quantify that. Now, the numbers we always hear are 18 to 28% commission. Mm-hmm. So that's a pretty hefty fee. Is that what you hear?
Yeah, absolutely. Anywhere between 20 to 25. Mm-hmm. It depends on a restaurant's ability to empower market power, whether they can negotiate that down. So obviously large volume restaurants have the ability to potentially bring that down a little bit. Mm-hmm. They also might have some infrastructure in place that they can negotiate with, where maybe a Grubhub doesn't need to do every single order or mm-hmm. something that nature. And so they may just be more of an ordering platform in that case, and so then they can negotiate those rates. But mm-hmm. that is pretty, right on the mark. And so mm-hmm. one of the things I would say to the folks who are thinking about getting started is, if you were to think about a restaurant that does $1 million a year, and let's say you grow your delivery from 5% of sales to 10% of sales. And if we grow, and what we're seeing right now, the adoption cycle is a lot of movement in terms of where customers are coming to us from, is they're moving out of the dining room and into their homes and getting delivery through these platforms. And so, over time, you might see your sales shift off premise in some ways in a dramatic fashion. And if, let's just say you start out with 25% of your sales being delivery, you're a $1 million business at 20% commission rate, you're going to lose $70,000 a year off the top, right? And as that number keeps growing, say 35%, 40, 50%, the return on the third party platform is going to start to diminish. And so that's where it becomes important to think about following up with investing in self-delivery to supplement what's going on there with your own direct-to-consumer ordering applications that don't have such a high cost. Mm-hmm. That's sort of a long-term goal, is you want to sort of evolve with the shift of your sales off-premise.
Mm-hmm. Well, one of the other things that we hear, one of the downsides of relying on a third party, not only is there the cost aspect, but there's also the loss of the information, because they're controlling that transaction. Yeah. They know who that customer is. You don't. In fact, that came up yesterday or Tuesday with Red Robin, where they had a bad quarter. They attributed it to a drop-off in dine-in traffic. They were asked by an analyst, well, is it a matter of your dine-in customers are switching to delivery? And the CFO had to admit, we don't really know, because we don't know who these people are. We have an educated guess, but that's about it. Do you see that easing at all? And how big of a factor is that?
So I think, I was thinking about that, and if you think about, the distinction between, say, an Uber and an Uber Eats, restaurants aren't, independent drivers with little bargaining power. These restaurants like Red Robin and all these other, McDonald's, they should be able in a position over time to negotiate and teach their partners that, we kind of view as a point of sale system and want you to act like one, where we own that data.
Mm-hmm.
Those are our customers. Right. And when we want it, we want to use it. And we want to use it to understand how we should be pricing things, where are sales coming from, what's the lifetime value of our customers. Mm-hmm. Simple things that every restaurant brand wants to understand. They aren't currently getting, and I would see at some point either these services learning how to service restaurants better, or restaurants being in a position to demand their data. Mm-hmm. But that's probably an evolution problem with the market.
Mm-hmm. Of course, the way around all these problems, or a lot of these problems, is to deliver yourself. I mean, the pizza chains have proven that, but Domino's in particular has proven that this can be quite a lucrative business model. Yeah. And yet we don't see that many people plunging initially in with self-delivery. Panera certainly, some of the Bloomin' brands, they are all doing self-delivery, though they're ramping up to it. How prevalent is self-delivery beyond the pizza guys? And do you expect that'll grow as demand?
I would expect the economic pressure that restaurant brands are going to face to force it to grow. Mm-hmm. It's not extremely widely prevalent now. Mm-hmm. It's growing for reason, and brands are just dabbling in it now and maybe faltering with some of it at the present time. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that, unlike the pizza players, these things weren't baked into their business model to begin with, right? So when you build a Domino's, that staffing and all that infrastructure is already part of that business plan. And so now we're trying to retrofit all these other brands to try to catch up with where pizza brands have been for the last 30 years, right, mm-hmm. from self-delivery. Mm-hmm. And so that's why a brand like Domino's was able to make a very easy pivot with their own app with some very smart technology, mm-hmm. Because they have all that infrastructure in place. And so brands today are outside of the pizza place. I think they're going to feel the need to move in that direction, but it's a long-term shift, mm-hmm. Because they're going to have to convince their investors, their board, and all this stuff to put the money down and to learn, test and learn, and fail a few times before they get it right, because mm-hmm. they haven't been doing it for 30 years like the pizza players.
So we actually have two more questions that came in. The first one is about third-party delivery. If you had an independently owned single restaurant, think like upscale casual, would you use a third-party delivery, and if so, is there one that you generally recommend?
Yeah, I would say yes. Typically off-premise has been owned by limited service, but where you saw in especially urban markets third-party delivery catching wind is, especially at dinner time, is in casual dining restaurants, upscale independent casual dining restaurants. And I think going back to Peter's point, it really depends on their geography, which ones you should go to, and you might need to be in more than one. And unfortunately, that means some complexity when it comes to operations and fielding orders. And so I think understanding which of those third-party delivery platforms is actually growing in your area, how they rate their drivers, what are customers and consumers saying about the services they provide. Those are things that you need to sort of vet out and compare. I wouldn't I wouldn't go with the first person that comes in the door.
I'd put another asterisk on that. Yes, you go with a third party unless you're in a location that has enough volume within a constrained area where you can have an employee run out an order. And the other thing that's coming into play, actually Darden has been very successful in this, is limiting the size of that delivery. They call it big order or catering, but really it's essentially just bringing a larger order where it's worth your while. It's a few $100s. Because one of the things we haven't talked about, the impression is that checks are considerably higher with delivery because it's usually 2 entrees, not two diners. But with big order, you can control it and it might be worth their while. So I guess the answer is try something. And certainly even some of the big guys with deep R&D departments are doing that.
Yeah, I mean, your competitors are doing it.
Yeah.
And your customers are going to find your competitors on those platforms. And it's an unfortunate reality. That's the way the world is going. And so being there now will be important. Otherwise, we'll lose later.
Can I just jump in with a follow-up to that, and then we'll take the other question? Do you think delivery or third parties are the big leveler in terms of equalizing the opportunities of independents and chains?
Now that more chains are jumping onto platforms, maybe less so than 2 or 3 years ago, because when say, let's just say Grubhub, for example, entered a market, a lot of the local independents jumped on board, and that really leveled the playing field between places that only had 1 unit versus one that had 3, a casual dining restaurant that might have had 4 or 5, or even in some markets 20 different stores to pick from. And so those brands had ubiquitous brand equity in those markets, and a one-off mom and pop restaurant could all of a sudden be discovered by people who may have never noticed it even driving by before. And with built-in customer ratings and all these other things that consumers make decisions with.
Sure.
It's very helpful.
So you said there was another question?
Yeah, so this one focuses on the catering aspect of off-premise. How does a small local chain compete for catering business with a larger chain with a budget for advertising? This operator says that they have a part-time catering manager who visits offices throughout the city, hoping to build a relationship and showing that their menu will encourage potential customers. Do you have any suggestions for that?
Yeah, for one thing, kudos to them for realizing that the best way to do it is shoe leather, going from business to business. The key there is finding out who actually makes that decision, because the person who signs the credit card slip often isn't the person who's choosing that caterer. So it is a matter of asking who handles the catering and reaching that person, or standing outside a large office building and watching who's coming in to see who's getting the business and where they're going. A little bit of guerrilla observation and competitor analysis for sure.
And with that, there are platforms out there to get I wouldn't call it free awareness, because you have to pay them a fee if you get orders through there, but there are platforms like Easy Cater and others that are available to help with that. But yeah, shoe leather is going to be important in that particular, because their salespeople are out there on the ground too.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, we've been talking a lot about delivery, and of course, takeout was sort of the base from which delivery grew. What do you see going on there? Is that booming as well, or is that a mature market?
It's actually still growing, but not roughly at maybe slightly above the pace of the rest of the market. And some of that is being facilitated by the rise of brand-owned ordering apps, as well as third-party who offer in-store pickup, obviously, right? So you're seeing, if you've been into a Starbucks lately and you've seen that little tiered stand where everyone, I'm still curious how no one gets their drink stolen, but where there could be 10 or 15 different lattes sitting there at a given time. Places like Starbucks are really going gangbusters with that sort of application, and I think with those types of applications, it's really good for those brands that are habitual purchases, like like coffee, for example, or even like a breakfast.
Sure. So I recently talked with the president of Schlotzsky's, and he was talking about that dynamic. Why don't customers get the wrong order? And he's convinced that Starbucks has taught the consumer world what to do and to be responsible. It's almost like a symbiotic situation.
Well, they started with putting your name on and now they print them out, and so you see people hunting for their names, and so it's kind of a natural rule following activity that consumers do. But if you wanted to go in there and be mischievous, it looks pretty easy.
Yeah, and then at the higher end, just to avert that or to keep people honest, as well as to perhaps preserve the product more diligently, you have what Little Caesars is doing, where they give you a code as you get closer. It's texted to you, and you put it into the little oven, take out the pizza, and off you go. I mean, it's a little pricey, but at least you're assured of what's what. Yeah. And another aspect when we talk about takeout, we got to mention curbside delivery.
Yeah.
Nothing new. I mean, the casual teams have been doing it since the early '90s, but you're definitely seeing a resurge of that. Technology seems to be aiding it quite a bit. So
yeah, absolutely, and for casual dining restaurants that had built that small little infrastructure out with curbside pickup and all those other things, they're starting to finally reap the benefits of it because of the technology.
Well, I am convinced that the new wrinkle in catering is going to be holiday catering, where essentially instead of doing those meals, those elaborate meals, you will get all or pieces of it from a restaurant, either delivered to you or you come and pick it up, and it's a big order. It saves a lot of labor, and it's a chance for chains like Popeyes, for instance, with their deep fried turkeys, to tout a signature product.
Yeah.
So one of the issues that comes up with delivery and takeout that we haven't talked about, and I'm surprised we didn't get a question about, is getting that drink order for off-premise. Has that changed? How often is that included or excluded from the meal? Do you have any gauge as to how much of a challenge that is and whether that the reality is changing?
I would say, so every restaurant struggles with attachment rates of extras. It's really important for them to try to maximize them for financial reasons. But and off-premise orders introduces a new wrinkle to that, and that is the ability to deliver the types of beverages you offer. In some instances, it may not be possible. If you have bike messengers, for example, how are you going to deliver fountain drinks? Is a problem for brands that we work with. And so the question becomes, how do we design a bundle that is deliverable? And this is in a QSR world, right? And then for the casual dining, you see brands like TGI Fridays experimenting with rent a bartender for an hour, thing. So they might be getting into the liquor distribution business, so that they're not missing that extra revenue from their customers, and you're going to have a lot of that's going to be solved for through smart design on applications and smart bundles.
You might recall a few years ago, maybe I want to say 6 or 7 years ago, McDonald's tested prepackaged drinks. Didn't go with it, but Dunkin' and their new unit of the future, that's part of the mix for that grab and go. Okay, let me just see. One of the things we talked about was delivery times. How much control does an operator have, and is there any way of kind of underscoring that or managing the delivery times?
I know that the relationships between third-party delivery and operators, they're sort of working together to try to solve for those issues. It's basically any customer complaint that an operator has that they take it to an Uber Eats or a Grubhub, they're going to try to work around and find solutions for. And some of that is really solved through the ability to understand, the types, the drivers coming into your door. Are they reliable and things of that nature? Because a lot of it is somewhat beyond your control. You're going to get an order, you're going to get to it however you can get to it. And when it's done, and hopefully the driver shows up when they say they are.
And hopefully has a hot bag, because operators always complain that the drivers walk away with their hot bags and they never see it again.
Yes, and and that's potentially an issue where that's going to have to be solved by the third-party provider. Is they're going to need to understand their customers better, and they're going to need to be able to provide those types of solutions. And if they don't actually employ those drivers directly, they may have a hard time doing that.
Sure. Any other operational issues that you see operators focusing on and managing?
Yeah.
I mean, I guess the most obvious one is if you have more business going out the door, do you need as many seats? But things along those lines?
Yeah, so I guess short term, you see a couple of things front of house is, for takeout is how do you manage that, especially if you're a casual dining restaurant that have never had to deal with off-premise orders before, and you see this in the mid-scale restaurant space a lot. Where are people going to pick up their orders?
Right.
And so if you go into a Cracker Barrel now, you see a bit of a station kind of plumped down in the middle of their retail space, which is taking up square footage from their lucrative retail shop. And so there's people, their restaurants are having to make trade-offs to try to accommodate for these issues. And the same thing's happening for delivery at the same time. And so you see certain restaurant brands where they might forfeit a place that might have been a former ordering station that is now where Uber Eats goes to pick up their deliveries from, right? So you're seeing square footage sort of being taken away for this off-premise business, and that's going to impact both your current stores, but also your stores of the future. And you're starting to see brands try to understand how are they going to build for this in the future. And that's going to mean kitchen design. That's going to mean in-store design. It doesn't mean that the dine-in is going to go away. It might mean it's designed differently. And one of the things that's kind of been transformative is this move towards more off-premise is opening up a space from almost a purely social occasion in the dine-in space, right? And so some brands are going to need to learn to cater to that more.
Sure. Well, we mentioned Red Robin, and they're a case in point. They acknowledged that their host or hostess used to be just someone who greeted you and seated you, and now that person has to handle delivery drivers, delivering takeout orders to a customer, as well as all of these other functions. And we talked about other areas of change in the restaurants. One of the interesting ones is not the drive-through, because it's not strictly a drive-through, but the drive-through pickup window, where all you're doing is getting the order, vis-a-vis what Chipotle is doing, or Dunkin' in their unit of the future, where you're ordering by app and you just come there and your order, you read it, geolocation, and off you go.
Yeah.
So, what about pricing? There's been a lot of talk about perhaps adjusting pricing to off-premise. It's a perceived value, it's a perceived plus. Might customers be willing to pay for that? Have you seen any of that? Any variable pricing?
Yeah, we have. The question is how long consumers are going to be willing to manage. Are they going to be able to adopt that? And if once they find out they're paying a different price in store versus online, what is their response going to be? They may accept it, but we're sort of in this new world where there are brands out there charging more for delivery, and a lot of that they're trying to make up for that percentage they're losing on delivery by charging more, because we do know that consumers are willing to spend more for the convenience of delivery. But if they were to pay one price for the same item on delivery and pay another in store, and they start to notice that, the question is are they going to start to question the value overall? And so we're sort of in that early stage, and I think we'll find out. But we do see restaurant brands experimenting with that right now.
Well, I think we're getting short on time, so with a few minutes remaining, what do you think's next? How is this whole thing going to unfold? How is the industry going to look differently 2 or 5 or 10 years from now because of this whole boom?
Sure. I was trying to think about what was a similar innovation that impacted the industry like this, and the closest thing I could come up with was the interstate highway system.
That's interesting.
And so if you think about, and I was just reading the other day about how after 60 years they finally finished I-95, right? But if you think about all those brands that grew up all up and down from New England to Miami along that corridor, that system created the possibility for a brand like McDonald's to expand nationwide, right? To where you have to be in the middle of the desert before you can be, away from one, and that sort of thing. And so today, we're going to see something fairly similar emerge. One of the things that's interesting about that particular period is no one really foresaw McDonald's emerging out of that time frame. Something new is going to happen, and the exciting thing is we're not exactly sure what that's going to be at this point. It could come from one of our existing legacy brands, or an entirely new business model could emerge.
So I bet you our listeners are surprised we didn't say that there would be more delivery-only restaurants, or what are known as ghost restaurants or headless restaurants, or you name it. We've not seen one succeed. That really, you could argue that the old Domino's was as close as we've come. Why do you think they haven't succeeded? Do you think that no one's cracked the code yet?
It doesn't mean they won't succeed. It could be too early to tell whether one of that business model is viable. In a lot of the restaurants we see attempting to succeed that way are established brands, and it may be that they're not getting enough volume out of the gate to sustain the business as of yet. And so, in the future, if off-premise shifts to fully 50% of sales of, say, a casual dining restaurant, it may make more sense that way. But right now, it just doesn't seem to be viable.
Here in Chicago, we've had some successes with that from Let Us Entertain You, Rich Melman's organization, but they give it a twist. They avoid all that overhead of a kitchen because they're using the kitchen of another brand that does a lot of dinner business, and hence during the day, there's no one there for lunch and for catering and delivery, office delivery. It's really been a boon for sure.
So you might see more shared kitchens like that.
Yeah. Similarly, there have been suggestions that at some point there could be shared delivery forces owned by a collection of restaurants, whether geographic or a franchisee who has multiple brands. Have you seen anything like that or heard anything?
I've heard
about
discussions of sort of aggregators of aggregator type solutions, so that there would be, one app to rule them all, sort of, and that would be, I think that restaurants would sort of have an interest in thinking about what that looks like in the future, so that they can control the data and understand where the orders are coming from, and so on and so forth. And there's definitely interest in that, but I haven't seen anything successful yet, but it's certainly a possibility.
Well, unfortunately, Rich, we're out of time, so we didn't have a chance to go through with our plan to have some food delivered here. But we'd like to thank all of our audience members for participating in today's live chat and for your questions. Thanks to you, Rich, for lending your expertise to today's discussions. For more insights on takeout and delivery, give a like to Restaurant Business and Technomic on Facebook. We'll also post a link to in today's events where you can go to subscribe to our newsletters to keep up with what's happening in the off-premise world. And be sure to look for future installments of Ask the Experts, where we'll continue to explore the growth opportunities of off-premise. On behalf of our sponsor, McCain Foodservice, thanks again for joining, and have a great afternoon. Thank you, Rich.
Thank you.